A beautiful childhood. Looking back on my childhood, I always think of it as a kind of golden hour. The sunlight just right, everything tinted with a soft glow of possibilities and laughter. My name is Emily Johnson, and I grew up on a quiet, tree-lined street in Queens, New York. Our neighborhood always felt like a small town, tucked away inside the sprawling city. And my memories there wouldn't be complete without Sarah Miller by my side. From the moment we met at John Adams Elementary, Sarah and I were inseparable. I can still remember our very first day. She wore a sunflower dress and had a habit of wrinkling her nose when she giggled. Somehow, just by sharing a smile over a box of crayons, we became best friends. Every afternoon after school, you could count on finding us at the little playground behind Maple Avenue. Those monkey bars and squeaky swings witnessed our first attempts at bravery. Sarah was always the bolder one, convincing me to try jumping off the highest swing or to race her to the corner store for popsicles in the summer. We'd spend hours sprawled in the grass, making up stories about clouds or whispering secrets only two 10-year-olds could dream up. Our friendship deepened over the years, growing roots through birthday sleepovers, filled with whispered stories and shared hopes. We built elaborate blanket forts in my basement when thunderstorms rolled in, and Sarah would always be the first to comfort me when the lightning sounded too close. My family became her second home, and her mom always welcomed me in with warm cookies and hugs. We carved our initials into the big oak tree on the school lawn, swearing we'd be best friends forever. Sarah and I bonded over everything: our favorite 90s cartoons, our love of puppies, and even our shared dread of math homework. I can still picture us at 10, practicing bike tricks on the cracked pavement in front of her house, cheering each other on and scraping our knees together. She was the first person I called when my dog, Max, got sick, and she never let me face the hard moments alone. When middle school got tough and the world started to feel a little more complicated, we leaned on each other even more. We had our inside jokes, coded notes we'd pass in class, and the unspoken understanding that whatever happened, we'd always be a team. One summer, we scraped up allowance money to buy matching charm bracelets from a little jewelry kiosk at the mall. I haven't taken mine off since, not even on the hardest days. Whenever I look at that tiny silver heart on my wrist, it takes me back to those simpler times. Endless summers, shared secrets, and a friendship that felt unbreakable. Even though I didn't know it then, those years laid the foundation for everything that followed. Back then, it was easy to trust in forever, and for a long time, I truly believed nothing could separate me from Sarah, my partner in adventure, and the sister I'd chosen for myself. Starting our careers together, graduating from college brought a mixture of relief and nervous excitement. The world felt enormous, filled with opportunity, but also intimidating in ways I hadn't expected. Fortunately, Sarah and I had promised each other that we'd pursue our dreams side by side, just as we'd always done. We spent the weeks after graduation scouring job postings, sending out resumes, and anxiously waiting for emails that might hold the keys to our future. It sometimes amazes me how fate seemed to keep us together. By some stroke of luck, or maybe just tenacity, we both landed entry-level positions at the same media company in Manhattan. The building itself was a gleaming high-rise, the lobby bustling with people who always seemed to be going somewhere important, fast. I still remember how nervous I was that first day, doubting if I belonged in that sea of polished professionals, clutching my subway card with sweaty palms. But Sarah stood beside me at the elevator, her presence as grounding as ever. and we exchanged one of our secret childhood smiles that said, "We've got this." Those first few months were a whirlwind of learning and adapting. We were both assigned to different departments, but we found time to grab lunch together almost every day. Over salads and bagels in the noisy cafeteria, we would trade stories of rookie mistakes, accidentally sending emails to the wrong John in accounting, getting stuck in endless meetings, or fumbling through our first big presentations. Even after long, exhausting days, we'd sometimes meet up in Central Park, sharing coffee and celebrating small victories, like getting positive feedback from a manager or publishing our first team article. Working in the same company didn't just offer comfort, it brought out a competitive spark I hadn't recognized in myself before. There was an unspoken drive between us, pushing each other to improve and step out of our comfort zones. We attended evening workshops together, pored over industry blogs, and practiced elevator pitches late into the night in Sarah's apartment, both of us believing that one day we'd be the ones leading those big meetings. But our friendship wasn't all ambition. There were Friday evenings when deadlines faded into laughter, and we'd sneak out early to enjoy happy hour at a little bar tucked away on a side street, reminiscing about high school and daring one another to dance to terrible pop songs. We built new traditions, like grabbing donuts at a 24-hour bakery after tough weeks, or leaving anonymous notes of encouragement for each other's desks. Through every stressful campaign and product launch, it was Sarah's voice that reminded me to take a breath, and my presence that kept her grounded when the pressures of city life loomed too large. Looking back, it felt like we were writing the first chapters of our adult lives together, armed with the confidence that only comes from a shared history. We supported each other, rooted for each other, and believed there was nothing we couldn't achieve as long as we did it side by side. In my heart, I truly thought nothing would ever change that. Strange signs. For a long time, my professional life with Sarah at my side felt like an extension of our childhood. Just the setting had changed, from playgrounds to boardrooms. But looking back, I now see there were small warnings, little shifts in the air, long before the real betrayal happened. At the time, though, I brushed them off, clinging to the comfort of our friendship and the shared history that had always brought us through every challenge together. The first sign was barely more than a flicker of confusion. We had just wrapped a small internal project, a social media push for one of the firm's lesser-known clients. I'd come up with a quirky campaign slogan, which we'd joked about during one of our late nights in Sarah's apartment, fueled by reheated Chinese takeout and too much caffeine. When the campaign launched, I was surprised to see Sarah's name on the company newsletter as the lead for the creative concept. At first, I laughed it off as a mix-up. Maybe someone in HR had pulled the wrong file. Maybe Sarah's name was just easier to remember. She was always more outgoing, better known around the office. The thought that it might be intentional seemed ridiculous, even a little disloyal. Things started snowballing after that. Our work routines overlapped in 100 little ways. We carpooled to the office, prepped for team meetings together, shared advice on polishing our LinkedIn profiles. So when I noticed Sarah asking a lot more detailed questions about my assignments, what I was pitching at next week's strategy meeting, who I'd been chatting with in marketing, how I was organizing my timeline, it felt at first like she was just being her supportive self. Only later did I realize those questions weren't as innocent as they seemed. One morning, I arrived early for a team meeting, notes in hand, ready to propose an idea I'd been mulling over for weeks. Our department, Digital Innovations, had struggled to stand out from the competition, and I'd spent countless late evenings crafting a new influencer partnership strategy that could finally put us on the map. Imagine my shock when, before I had a chance to speak, Sarah stood up and presented, almost word for word, my entire idea. She'd even adopted some of my own language. The same campaign title, the same slides. I was so stunned that I barely registered anything else for the rest of the meeting. When our manager praised her for her bold vision, I forced myself to smile, cheeks burning with confusion and humiliation. Afterward, I told myself maybe she hadn't realized she was echoing my ideas, that maybe our brainstorming sessions had morphed into a kind of shared ownership. But the doubts kept creeping in. Walking home that night, trudging through the drizzle, I replayed our recent conversations in my head. Was I imagining things? Was I being unfair? Sarah seemed to sense my uncertainty. She was more attentive than usual in the following days, showing up at my desk with extra coffee, complimenting my latest project, insisting we go out to celebrate our wins. I wanted to believe her. After all, she'd been my best friend since childhood, the person who knew me better than I knew myself, or so I thought. A few weeks later, another strange incident happened. I'd been working for days on a comprehensive analytics report for a potential client. Late nights at the office, charts and projections swimming before my eyes. After printing my draft and leaving it on my desk one evening, I went home for a much-needed break. The next morning, my version was gone. At my desk, in its place, was a subtly tweaked copy, this time with Sarah's name on the cover and small changes throughout. I was furious. Initially, only at myself for being careless. When I confronted Sarah, she brushed it off with a laugh, saying someone in the office must have mixed up our files and hope it wasn't a big deal. Her casual denial only confused me more. I worried I was being paranoid, seeing betrayal where there was none. But these blended boundaries kept repeating. Our manager started asking Sarah for progress updates on projects I was leading, and she always seemed to have timely answers. Sometimes I'd find my email drafts missing after stepping away from my computer. Other times, my calendar reminders would have shifted or disappeared entirely. Curious, I began marking my files and emails with subtle flags, saving versions with different timestamps, BCCing myself on crucial correspondence, or using little cues only I would recognize. My doubts weren't limited to work. There was a subtle change in Sarah, too. A slight defensiveness when I questioned her about shared ideas, a tendency to avoid eye contact, and a new edge to her sense of humor that sometimes made me feel uncomfortable rather than supported. I chalked it up to stress, believing the pressure of the job was getting to both of us. The idea that she was deliberately undermining me never occurred to me. Or perhaps it did, but it felt too painful to contemplate directly. The real turning point came during an important pitch for a new technology client. Our team was under serious pressure to land the account, and both Sarah and I had been tapped to present our separate proposals to the board. I'd prepared meticulously, mock presentations in front of my bathroom mirror, countless hours researching digital trends, and slide decks fine-tuned late into the night. The day before the meeting, I found my flash drive missing from my desk. I assumed I'd dropped it somewhere on my way home. Thankfully, I had backup files saved on my personal laptop. The next morning, sitting in the glass-walled conference room, I watched as Sarah stood up to present first. Slide by slide, my heart dropped. She pitched the exact strategy I'd spent weeks building. Same visuals, same data points, same client insights, down to the jokes I'd planned to break the tension. The only difference was her name on the presentation. My own slides, when my turn finally came, suddenly felt redundant and disorganized. The panel, initially enthusiastic, became increasingly distracted as I spoke. When it was over, I felt hollowed out, as if my confidence had evaporated right there under the office's fluorescent lights. That evening, after everyone else had left, I sat alone at my desk, staring out at the city's twinkling lights, questioning everything. Had I been too open, too trusting? I started replaying the little red flags I'd ignored. The questions, the borrowed ideas, the missing files. The pattern was unmistakable, and the realization left me cold. I tried reaching out to Sarah, hoping to find some reconciliation, but the next day she barely spoke to me. Swept up in the excitement of another personal triumph. She hadn't won the pitch for the team. She had won it for herself, in whatever warmth once lingered in our friendship, felt suddenly, unmistakably distant. It wasn't just one betrayal. It was death by 1,000 cuts. There were whispered conversations with our boss that stopped when I stepped into the break room. New projects assigned to both of us, mysteriously ending up with only her on the final team list, and the growing feeling that my achievements were invisible unless she stood beside me, smiling for the camera. She started receiving recognition and credit at department meetings for collaborative work. And when I privately raised my concerns to her, she'd change the subject, making me feel petty or jealous. More than anything, I missed the friend I thought I knew. The girl who'd built tree forts with me in the backyard, who'd held my hand on the first day of work, who'd promised we'd make it together. Now, I felt alone and suspicious, questioning my sanity every time a file disappeared or an idea was echoed back to me from someone else's lips. It was also around this time that people at work began to treat me differently. Subtle shifts, fewer invitations to after-work gatherings, an awkward pause in conversations when I entered the room. Managers looking past me to ask Sarah for my project updates. The isolation grew, and so did the pressure to keep up, to not let my mounting doubts and pain impact my performance. There were nights I considered leaving, finding a new job, starting fresh somewhere, without the weight of old friendships turned sour. But something inside me refused to give in. I knew my work was good. I knew I deserved recognition, and I needed answers. If not for justice, then for my own peace of mind. So I became more cautious than ever. I password protected everything. I kept a private log at home of project, timelines, meeting notes, and who had access to what. I stopped confiding in Sarah, or anyone I didn't completely trust, focusing instead on doing what I did best, working hard and staying precise. My circle shrank. My world seemed smaller, but I managed to regain some control. Nevertheless, the pain of seeing Sarah celebrated, watching her steadily step into the light that I had helped create, never fully faded. The hardest part wasn't losing recognition. It was grappling with the knowledge that someone I'd loved and trusted could be capable of undermining me in such a calculated way. Each day that passed made the distance between us more pronounced, and without ever saying it out loud, I realized our friendship, the old friendship, was already gone. Still, even with these suspicions swirling around me, I hadn't yet uncovered the full truth. I clung to a shred of denial. Maybe it was office politics. Maybe I needed to toughen up. Maybe I was just unlucky. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important, something buried beneath the surface of every stolen idea and every forced smile. Little did I know that everything would eventually unravel in a single moment. A moment that would force me to face a truth far more devastating than anything I could have imagined. But for now, I lived in that unsettling state of suspicion and sorrow. The golden days of our friendship replaced by shadows and uncertainty. Discovery of the truth Sometimes, the truth doesn't come at you in a dramatic confrontation or a cinematic unraveling. Sometimes it sneaks in quietly through a mundane Monday morning when you're sleepily sifting through emails. That's how it happened to me. If you'd asked me a month before, I'd have said I was too cautious, too guarded after all those odd disappearances and the mounting evidence of Sarah's duplicity. But caution, I learned, is often no match for chance. It started as just another endless thread of emails. My eyes glazed over as Outlook loaded, the blue bar inching painfully slow across the screen. Most of it was noise, company newsletters, policy updates, a happy birthday e-card for someone in accounting. Then one message, subject, FWD, urgent, review needed, caught my eye. The sender was Jennifer, a project manager from HR, someone I had little direct contact with. I almost skipped over it, assuming it was a mass email, but I noticed there were no other recipients, just me. Curiosity piqued, I clicked open the thread. What I saw wasn't just Jennifer's quick note. Emily, is this the latest version? Let me know. Thanks. But a series of replies and forwards below her brief message, and beneath those, a chain of correspondence between Sarah and my direct supervisor, Mark. My blood ran cold as I scrolled, my fingers almost numb on the mouse. It was painfully obvious Jennifer had mistakenly CC'd me instead of someone else. Her slip was the crack in an otherwise airtight wall. My stomach churned with a knot of shock and dread. In the email thread, there it was. Plain, ugly, undeniable. Mark, do you have the analytics breakdown for Northbridge? I saw your proposal draft in the shared folder, but it's missing the client targets. Sarah, yes, almost done. Emily started the preliminaries, but missed critical benchmarks. I've had to redo much of it. I'll send you an updated version today. There was more. Attached were files, my original notes with their metadata erased and replaced with small edits that removed my initials. But what hurt most wasn't the stolen work. It was reading, in black and white, Sarah actively blaming me for delays and quietly positioning herself as the hero, fixing my supposed mistakes. Scrolling further, I saw Mark's response. Thanks for stepping in. Emily seems to be struggling recently, but don't worry. Upper management needs winners right now. I appreciate your initiative. My thoughts spiraled, emotions washing over me like icy water. There was an undeniable clarity here. The winner in this race was whoever shaped the narrative first, and Sarah had done so behind my back, smoothly, methodically, all while meeting me after hours for coffee and texting me emojis and laugh-out-loud memes. For a minute, I felt paralyzed. All my years of trusting Sarah, all the whispers of doubt I'd convinced myself to ignore, crystallized into something sharp and real. This went far beyond forgotten files or teamwork lines blurred by corporate chaos. This was calculated sabotage, and my so-called best friend was at the center of it. Everything after that became a blur, a jagged, adrenaline-fueled dash to collect my thoughts and preserve everything. I quickly saved Jennifer's email and the entire thread, forwarding it to my personal address, double-checking that no one noticed me switching screens. I knew I was staring at proof, tangible evidence that months of subtle exclusion, isolation, stolen recognition, and strange coincidences weren't my imagination after all. But the more I read, the deeper the betrayal felt. Sarah had been feeding Mark updates about my progress on the Harris campaign, subtly pointing out my inconsistencies while boosting her own role. She'd even written, "Don't worry, if there are any client-facing issues during the pitch, I'll step up and cover for her." We both want what's best for the company. The audacity of her wording made my skin crawl. She wore my hard work like a borrowed coat, all the while setting me up to look incompetent if anything went wrong. Everything made sudden, bitter sense. The team lunches I was no longer invited to, the lost chances to present my own projects, the new accounts Sarah somehow landed under her name, despite our joint efforts. It was strategic. She'd been engineering not only her success, but my slow, silent erasure. Rage and heartbreak whirled inside me. I wanted to cry, to yell, to run back to that little playground from our childhood where the world was simple and safe. But I wasn't a child anymore, and this wasn't a playground. I wiped tears from my eyes, got up, and locked myself in the bathroom stall, letting myself feel everything for a long, quiet moment. A silent scream, all bottled up. But when I returned to my desk, something inside me hardened. I knew I only had one chance to act, and I wasn't going to let all my hard work and my self-worth be erased by someone else's ambition. I started playing chess, quietly and methodically, the way Sarah had for months. There was a new sense of resolve. I would not confront her yet. I needed all the facts, every misstep, every digital breadcrumb. For the next several days, I barely slept. I searched every shared folder methodically, reviewing old email threads, digging for any files I'd authored and cross-checking them with the versions credited to Sarah. I documented every discrepancy, screenshotting timestamps, preserving drafts that clearly showed my name in their metadata before her revisions. I compared calendar invites, searching for proof of when I'd shared ideas before they ever landed in Sarah's presentations. By Thursday, I'd accumulated an entire folder of digital evidence in a color-coded spreadsheet, tying Sarah's communications to missing files, altered reports, and deliberate blame shifting. I hoped for a sense of relief, but all I felt was sadness for our lost friendship, and for the innocence I'd left behind with each new revelation. There was also a quiet liberation in gathering the truth, a sense that I was reclaiming my own narrative after months of gaslighting and self-doubt. I saw, with heartbreaking clarity, how effective Sarah's duplicity had been. She knew my strengths and weaknesses, my insecurities and hopes, and she'd used all of that not to build with me, but to edge me out, step by step. Late one night, unable to sleep, I scrolled through old photos, awkward school dances, movie nights, birthdays with cupcakes and paper crowns. There was one picture of us on the rooftop overlooking the city, arms slung around each other, grinning, the Empire State Building glittering behind us. I ached for that girl, the naive, open-hearted version of me, before I'd learned what true betrayal looked like. As much as I wanted to mourn her, I knew that what I really needed was to protect this new, wiser self from further harm. In the meantime, Sarah remained her usual self, breezing through the office, sending upbeat emails, planning lunch orders, and nodding along in meetings as if nothing had changed. She even messaged me a meme about surviving Monday that week, as though we were still close and the air wasn't thick with unsaid words. It felt surreal, how easy it was, apparently, for her to compartmentalize, to glide through daily interactions while undermining me in private. The next big blow came one afternoon when IT sent out an update regarding unusual file access on the company's shared drive. Apparently, someone had repeatedly logged into my folders after hours. I met with the IT manager quietly and requested an access log, citing lost files and collaborative confusion. With his help, it became irrefutable. Sarah's login credentials appeared on dates and times, exactly matching my missing documents, split-second edits, and last-minute miracle saves on campaigns she claimed to have rescued. That was my line in the sand. The evidence I needed to finally, definitively, take action. I compiled my notes with painstaking care, aligning digital timestamps with email threads, Slack messages, and even our face-to-face conversations. I wrote a clear, chronological narrative, free of emotion, backed by evidence, an indisputable record of what had transpired. Still, there was one conversation I kept rehearsing in my mind. Should I confront Sarah first, in private, the way friends, or former friends, might in the movies? Should I give her a chance to explain herself, even to apologize? The more I considered it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about friendship anymore. It was about integrity, mine and the company's. Instead, I reached out to Mark and HR, requesting a confidential meeting. The morning before, I took a walk around the block, my heart pounding so hard I could barely hear my thoughts above the rush of blood in my ears. There was a breeze in the air, and the city buzzed around me, oblivious. I squared my shoulders and reminded myself that I had done nothing wrong, that standing up for myself didn't make me vindictive or weak, but strong. In the meeting, I calmly presented my evidence, piece by piece, resisting the urge to let emotion spill over. Mark's expression shifted from mild detachment to shock, while Jennifer from HR methodically took notes and asked clarifying questions. The IT logs, the altered presentation files, the email trail, each one made Sarah's pattern harder to deny. When the meeting ended, I sat in the empty conference room for a full 10 minutes, just breathing. I felt both spent and electrified, like I'd run a marathon after months of crawling. I didn't know what would happen next, or how the confrontation would unfold. But for the first time in months, I felt weightless, unburdened by doubt. The truth was out now. I'd done all I could. As I packed up my evidence folder, I realized something had shifted. Yes, I was hurt, deeply, but there was new strength there, too. Something resilient, quietly replacing the wound. No matter what Sarah or anyone else did from here on, I knew who I was and what I stood for, and no one, not even my oldest friend, could take that away. Standing up for myself. For days after the meeting with Mark and Jennifer, the world felt oddly weightless, like I was floating outside my own skin. I kept replaying the details in my mind, the slow, wide-eyed dawning on Mark's face as he read the emails, Jennifer's pen pausing mid-scribble when I showed her the IT logs, the slick rustle of evidence stacking up, irrevocable and final. With the truth out, I'd expected to feel immediate triumph. Instead, it was all just brittle and unfamiliar, the edges of my day sharper and the hours strangely empty. What they don't tell you about standing up for yourself is just how lonely it can be in the aftermath, even when you're right, even with justice on your side. There was a part of me that longed for the comforting validation of a cheering crowd, but reality was so much quieter, so much more personal. At night, in my tiny apartment, every doubt came slinking back. Maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I could have found another way. Maybe Sarah deserved forgiveness, or at least a conversation, before everything went public. But beneath the waves of second-guessing was a firmer, quieter current. You can either live silenced by fear or step into the storm. I remembered standing by as Sarah claimed another of my ideas in a meeting, and the shame that burned in my face when I forced myself to laugh it off. I remembered every diminutive smile, every accidental erasure of my name, every time she shrugged at my growing suspicion and made me question my own worth. I knew then, silence was no longer an option. The days that followed were a lesson in patience and resolve. Official procedures had to play out, meetings, formal statements, digital audits. Mark's initial shock sharpened into professional concern. He and Jennifer asked for more details, requesting I trace the timeline and provide all supporting evidence. I spent late nights poring over emails, digging through archived folders, color-coding files, cross-referencing every detail. My home became a war room of Post-it notes, timelines, and digests. This was the hardest part. Not the discovery, or even confronting the company, but sitting with the aftermath. My truth was out, but so was my vulnerability. I reveled in moments of certainty, but they were always shadowed by an ache, grieving a friendship, mourning the naive trust that had been such a part of my identity. Sometimes I'd look at my wrist, where Sarah's charm bracelet still hung, and the weight of its meaning turned heavy and cold. For days, Sarah and I orbited the office like ghosts on different spectrums, never meeting eyes, never crossing paths, except for the rare, unavoidable hallway run-in. Once, she nodded in my direction, her expression careful and unreadable. Another time, I saw her in the break room, talking in sharp whispers with a colleague who used to save me a spot at lunch. It was as if tectonic plates had shifted beneath the building, separating me from my old world, one invisible inch at a time. It surprised me that the greatest challenge wasn't facing Sarah or our superiors. It was holding on to my own narrative while the ground kept shifting under my feet. Gossip bloomed, as it always did, in whispered prayers and side glances. Some co-workers pulled away, awkward and reserved, while a few left little notes of encouragement in my drawer or invited me for coffee, signaling quiet support. Still, I spent most of those weeks in a strange half-exile, working late to avoid crowds, putting up a wall of focus just to get through the day. In those hours after work, when the building was nearly empty, I'd sit by the floor-to-ceiling windows and look out at the city. I thought of all the people below, each living their own complicated overlaps of loyalty, ambition, and heartbreak. It struck me that disappointment is as much a part of adulthood as hope. I realized, too, that sometimes strength looks less like righteous outrage and more like perseverance, a refusal to bow before the tide of another's misdeeds. Internally, I wrestled with the tangle of forgiveness. Should I try to speak with Sarah again? Should I allow my anger space to breathe, or would that only corrode me further? Part of me craved confrontation, not for revenge, but for the closure I wanted so desperately. Yet, more powerfully, I felt drawn to a different resolution, one rooted in action, not reflection. I wanted to let the facts speak. Company policy required a discreet process. Mark and Jennifer brought in a third-party investigator to examine the files, reconfirm the audit logs, and conduct interviews. It was all so clinical, a world away from the warm, chaotic nights of adolescent secrets. When the investigator met with me, she was quiet and composed, asking for details with practiced patience. At the end of our conversation, she nodded, pen poised over her legal pad, and paused for an extra heartbeat. Not everyone would come forward, she said quietly, especially against an old friend. Those words stayed with me. I realized that my silence would never have kept me safe. Protecting what's yours, your reputation, your ideas, your voice, isn't just about justice. It's about self-worth. Still, waiting for a resolution was its own form of agony. Days turned into close to 2 weeks, each morning opening with the familiar jolt of anxiety. Would today be the day? Would I be called into another meeting? Would there finally be closure, or just more doubt? Through it all, I stuck to my work, refusing to slip. I told myself, if they're watching me now, let them see what I'm capable of. It was a Friday when the decision was made. I arrived that morning with a sense of inevitability humming in my bones. As I stepped into the elevator, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored doors. A little older, a little sharper, but somehow freer. I stopped at my desk, straightened my files, and tried to ignore the tension in the air. I'd barely logged into my computer before Mark appeared at my cubicle. "Emily," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "HR will be briefing everyone before lunch." The meeting was a blur. I expected anger or finger-pointing, public drama, or private backstabbing. Instead, the announcement came in measured tones. After a thorough investigation, we've determined that a serious breach of conduct occurred concerning intellectual property and attribution. The responsible party is no longer with the company. That was it. No names, no spectacle, just a quiet, official line and the exchange of glances, some sympathetic, others suspicious, a few simply relieved the tension had finally broken. Sarah's desk was empty when the meeting ended, personal items already gone. I sat at my station for a long while, letting it all sink in, what it meant, what it cost, what I'd gained. The aftermath was both anticlimactic and deeply moving. Almost immediately, colleagues began to approach me, not with grand gestures, but with small, genuine kindnesses. One left a sticky note that read, "Glad you're still here." Another invited me to join the team lunch again. Soon after, Mark called me into his office and told me, "You showed real courage, Emily. We want you to lead the new campaign." I realized then that standing up for yourself was so much more than a single act. It was a series of decisions, a commitment to self-respect, to clarity, to pushing forward even when your heart is torn. The process didn't make me feel heroic. It made me human. Of course, the pain didn't disappear overnight. That same afternoon, I found myself sitting at my favorite cafe, staring at the city and thinking about all the memories Sarah and I had shared. The charm bracelet on my wrist glinted in the sunlight, a reminder that even deep wounds can leave something beautiful, if only a reminder of resilience. Sometimes I still wanted to call her, to ask why, or was it worth it? But I knew the real answer had nothing to do with her. It was about me. Friends reached out, old college roommates, cousins, even people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some had heard rumors, others just sensed I needed the connection. Their messages reminded me I wasn't defined by Sarah's betrayal. I was shaped by the way I chose to respond to it. When my promotion became official, I brought donuts for the team, not just as a celebration, but as a kind of olive branch. I wanted to mark a new beginning. Moments like that felt bittersweet, because I couldn't fully celebrate without remembering everything it took to get here. But they also felt right. Proof that I was still myself, heart intact. In time, my outlook on workplace relationships shifted. I built new boundaries, trusted more cautiously, and valued transparency above all else. I even joined a mentoring group for young women in the industry, determined to pay my hard-earned wisdom forward. I told my story at luncheons and panels, leaving out the names, but not the lessons. I spoke about the messiness of trust and competition, and about the courage it takes to speak up when everything you care about is on the line. Some evenings, when the sky over Manhattan turned gold, I'd walk along the river and reflect on how far I'd come. I learned that righteousness isn't about revenge, but about reclamation of your time, your credit, your place at the table. I'd be lying if I said there weren't regrets, but the overriding sense was one of integrity reclaimed. Standing up for myself didn't give me back my old friendship or the lost innocence of my early career, but it gave me something deeper, a quiet confidence, the certainty that when the world tests you, you don't have to shrink or hide. You can insist on your truth, and you can build a new life in its light. And that, after everything, was enough. Exposing my best friend, the day I took the lead. The morning of my official promotion as team leader dawned crisp and unusually clear. I remember how the city outside my window looked sharper, every edge outlined by a startling certainty. I had slept only a few scattered hours, mind replaying endless scenarios. In each one, I tried to rehearse lines, imagine outcomes, adjust my emotions to the weight of what was about to happen. But nothing could really prepare me for the truth that today I would lay bare a betrayal in front of not just my colleagues, but the leaders who shaped my future. Walking into the office that morning, I felt like I was stepping onto a stage. I wore my navy blue dress, the interview dress, the one I'd saved for moments when I needed to feel powerful and collected. As the elevator climbed, I met my own eyes in the mirrored panel. They looked different, older maybe, stronger, definitely. When I stepped out, the atmosphere felt expectant, almost electric, as if everyone sensed something momentous simmering just below the surface. I could feel subtle glances as I passed, a mixture of curiosity, sympathy, maybe a flicker of relief that the unresolved tension at the office was about to end. At my desk, a card from my old college roommate waited. "You earned this. Rooting for you." I smiled, then slid it into my bag. Today, every gesture of support mattered. At 10 a.m., the entire department gathered in the conference room for the official leadership announcement. Everything was by the book. Platitudes about hard work and teamwork, words about vision and the company's next chapter. Mark, our direct supervisor, stood at the front with Jennifer from HR, both faces composed and formal. The air conditioning hummed more loudly than usual. After the congratulations, as the applause faded, Mark turned to me. "Emily, would you like to address the team?" I stood, fingers trembling inside clenched fists. This was the moment, the intersection of my vindication and my loss. "Thank you, everyone," I said, voice steadier than I expected. "Today isn't just a new beginning for me. It's a chance for our team to move forward with honesty and respect." I looked out over the faces clustered around me, some nervously curious, others supportive, a few distinctly tense. I took a deep breath. Before we can do that, there's something important I need to share with all of you and with the leadership. It concerns our recent projects and the value of trust in this company. Sarah sat 3 seats down, eyes dark and unreadable, arms crossed over her chest. I could feel her stare, a single, unblinking challenge. The betrayal I'd unearthed, the months of lost credit, missing files, snatched recognition, tightened in my chest, but it didn't choke me anymore. I was here to reclaim my voice. I methodically laid out the facts. I showed how key campaign ideas and analytics reports, at the heart of our pivotal accounts, had been manipulated and reattributed. IT logs, emails, side-by-side screenshots, timestamps. The evidence didn't accuse with emotion. It simply spoke, irrefutable and cold. Colleagues sat in stunned silence as I recounted the pattern. Files accessed outside work hours, my drafts appearing under another name. Management quietly swayed by manipulated narratives. Jennifer and Mark had seen some of this in the investigation, but this was different, public, comprehensive, with each data point mapped out like a trail of breadcrumbs, too obvious to ignore. As I spoke, Sarah's mask slipped. For a moment, She glanced away, jaw taut, then fixed her face into something carefully neutral. She opened her mouth to interrupt once, but Mark held up a hand. "Let Emily finish." My heart hammered, but I pressed on, voice gathering strength. I chose not to list every slight, every old friendship wound. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about protecting the culture I wanted to build. "We all make mistakes," I said, finally, my eyes finding Sarah's. "But what matters is how we respond to them and how we move forward. I believe we're stronger as a team when honesty is our foundation." For a heartbeat, the room was painfully silent. No shuffling of chairs, no soft coughs, not even the usual hum of laptop fans. I felt exposed, but surprisingly, I also felt lighter, like the terrible weight of secrecy had finally lifted. Jennifer spoke next, her tone gentle but firm, as she outlined the company's zero-tolerance stance on intellectual property breaches and unethical attribution. In her words, I heard confirmation that the truth meant something, not just for me, but for everyone watching. "Integrity and transparency are non-negotiable," she said, and I believed her. Sarah never argued, at least not then. She stared at the wall, face blank. I wondered if she felt relief, too, a warped sort of liberation from the lie she'd nurtured so long. Or maybe she just felt the sting of consequences closing in. When she finally stood, taking her bag with a trembling hand, she walked past me without acknowledgement. I felt the urge to reach for her, to ask her why, to salvage something of the childhood we'd once shared. But there were no words left, and the moment passed. The aftermath in the room was strange, an unsettled relief mixed with sadness. Several teammates approached me quietly, some offering hesitant congratulations, others simply shaking my hand or giving a supportive nod. Some, I'm sure, didn't know what to say. One or two looked away, perhaps out of discomfort, or perhaps wrestling with the need for self-reflection in their own working lives. The rest of the day passed in a haze of HR formalities and closed-door meetings. Jennifer handled the logistics of Sarah's departure with compassion and an unshakable professionalism. There was no dramatic confrontation, no viral video moment, just the slow, silent unraveling of a fabric that had hidden flaws far too long. At my desk later, I found notes in my inbox and messaging app, some from colleagues who thanked me for my courage, others from people in other departments who had seen similar patterns and wanted reassurance that this environment could change. A few even offered small apologies for not seeing what was happening sooner. Each message chipped away at my solitude, rebuilding a sense of belonging bit by bit. That evening, after everyone had cleared out, I stayed behind. I watched the city lights flicker on beyond the windows and let myself finally feel the cost. So much of my early adulthood seemed tied to Sarah, our post-college dreams, our first big wins, our secret jokes about surviving in Manhattan. I let the tears come, not just for the friend I'd lost, but for the part of myself that had believed some relationships were unbreakable. In the silence, though, another feeling crept in. Pride. Not the loud, showy kind, but something quieter. A sense that I'd fought for my voice, not just for myself, but for those who might come next. I answered a few texts from family. My mom had left a happy, worried voicemail. My cousin sent a gif of Wonder Woman. Even my father, never quick with sentiment, texted, "Proud of you, Peanut." For the first time since I was very young, I felt seen for who I really was, someone who could stand alone, even when it hurt. The following days were filled with new beginnings. I initiated one-on-one meetings with every member of my new team, listening, inviting feedback, asking what they needed to thrive. I didn't shy away from mentioning what had happened, not in lurid detail, but as a touchstone, a commitment that things would be different. I saw the relief on their faces, the spark of renewed engagement. We set up new protocols to track idea ownership, shared files, and recognized contributions. I fostered collaboration, but I also drew clear lines. Friendship was welcome here, but transparency was non-negotiable. Word of the incident spread in the company, as things do, but the tone was different than I had feared. I became someone colleagues approached with their own concerns, some minor, mostly just wanting to be heard, grateful for leadership that took integrity seriously. I realized what I had always suspected in my heart. Changing a culture starts with one moment of truth, one person willing to risk comfort for something more lasting. Looking back, the day I exposed Sarah was the hardest of my life, but also the day I felt most truly like myself. It hurt, profoundly, unforgettably, but it also healed something I didn't know was broken. I learned that sometimes the only way to honor your history is to carve out space for your own future, no matter how painful the process. On my first weekend as team leader, I walked through Central Park alone. The city was alive in its autumn gold, families laughing, music drifting from a nearby carousel. I sat on a bench beneath an old tree and touched the charm bracelet on my wrist, my silent symbol of endurance, the past and present both. I allowed myself to grieve what was gone, and then, very gently, to let it go. And as the sun set behind Manhattan's skyline, I realized I was ready to lead, to trust my judgment, to build something new from the ashes. The truth had cost me, but in standing up and refusing to shrink from the spotlight, I'd given myself something even more precious, self-respect and a sense of belonging that was all my own. A costly lesson. Sarah left the company soon after, as quietly as a shadow slipping out before sunrise. Word of her departure spread among my colleagues with the speed and subtlety of all office gossip, but nobody asked for details. Whether from discomfort, respect for privacy, or fear of looking foolish for once admiring her, everyone kept their speculations to whispered corners. For me, those first days, without her presence, were both a relief and a strange kind of grief. There was no dramatic confrontation, no cathartic shouting match. The end came in a memo, in the slow erasure of her login credentials from our systems. A simple digital vanishing act that belied years of shared history. In the weeks that followed, I kept waiting for life to return to normal. I expected the cloud to lift as soon as the injustice was set right, but the world had already shifted. Habits were broken, the inside jokes we'd traded, the texts about whose turn it was to bring coffee. These didn't just fade. They left awkward gaps in my days that ached in unexpected moments. I would stop myself reaching for my phone to share some absurd office meme and remember that the person who'd once been my first call was now firmly, irrevocably in the past. But absence makes room for perspective. At first, it was just raw pain and confusion, the instinct to interrogate every memory for signs I should have seen. Pain can be blinding, but it can also be clarifying. In those quiet evenings, walking home past the twinkling storefronts of our old neighborhood, I began the slow, deliberate work of putting myself back together. Some lessons crystallized in the silence. Trust isn't a given, even for those we love most. Sometimes, the very closeness that once felt like safety can become the window through which betrayal sneaks in. I replayed moments of our friendship, not to torture myself, but to understand. There were tiny boundary crossings, casual white lies, the way Sarah sometimes craved credit in front of others, but brushed off her mistakes when we were alone. Had I dismissed these as quirks because I needed her as my anchor, even when the tides were quietly shifting? Still, I refused to let myself become cynical. The moral of my story wasn't that trust is for fools, or that closeness is a guarantee of future pain. Instead, I realized that discernment and generosity have to go hand in hand. Trust is beautiful, but it needs boundaries. Loyalty is essential, but so are self-respect and vigilance. My new life at work unfolded slowly, each day weaving itself into a tapestry both familiar and foreign. Leading the team for the first time was equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. I found myself overseeing some of the same projects Sarah and I had once worked on together, now tasked with steering colleagues who had witnessed our quiet implosion. Would they question my leadership, compare us in the backs of their minds? Those doubts surfaced now and then, but they didn't stop me from moving forward. If the betrayal had left me guarded, it also forged a kind of clarity. I adopted an open-door policy, making sure everyone felt their input mattered and was properly credited. I set up a system for tracking project ownership, clear records, transparent files, routine group updates, so recognition couldn't quietly slip away. The team responded, some with palpable relief, some with curiosity, a few with wary skepticism that softened over time as trust was rebuilt. Oddly, my greatest reward wasn't public praise. Instead, it was the quiet, steady return of a sense of belonging. The little things. The way voices brightened at our weekly check-ins, spontaneous rounds of applause for team wins. The look of pride on someone's face when their idea was championed in front of management. Sometimes I caught myself scanning the room for Sarah's reaction, out of old habit, and had to smile at the new normal. From time to time, people confided in me. Fears about being overlooked, stories of credit lost in previous jobs, even small betrayals that stayed with them. Some evenings, I stayed late to talk through these concerns, sharing just enough of my own story to let them know they weren't alone. I understood, more than ever, how a supportive leader could shape a career, and how damaging the opposite could be. Yet, for all the professional growth, the healing was slower when it came to my heart. I realized how hard it was to grieve someone who was still out there, living their life, perhaps even telling herself a borrowed version of our story. I gave myself permission to mourn, not just the lost friendship, but the lost innocence. Grief doesn't honor a timeline. It unfolds in its own way. Tears at my desk when I found old photos tucked in a drawer. The hollow ache when memories snuck up during ordinary moments. The complicated mixture of gratitude and regret I felt slipping off the charm bracelet we'd bought together. I didn't throw it away. Instead, I tucked it into a jewelry box, a bittersweet relic of a chapter that had made me who I was. My family and friends, the real kind, showed up for me in quiet, healing ways. My mom spoke of her own workplace battles from decades past, lending me hard-won wisdom. My dad, uncomfortable with emotional topics, showed up with extra groceries and surprise takeout. My cousin insisted on dragging me to spin classes, claiming endorphins could heal anything. Each act was its own kind of proof. Not everyone will let you down, and you don't have to carry your pain alone. As I carved out space for reflection, I realized that adversity isn't just an obstacle, it's a forge. I was different now, a little less trusting by default, but infinitely more aware of my own value. I was more alert to red flags, less eager to rationalize away warning signs. But I was also more compassionate, more attuned to the struggles of others, spun up in the chaos of ambition and anxiety. The biggest shift was internal. Where I'd once let self-doubt creep in with every setback, Now I grounded myself in facts, in self-appraisal. Feedback, good and bad, became information, not ammunition. I learned to separate my worth from the fleeting approval or criticism of others, especially those with their own shadowy agendas. What I lost in Sarah, I gained in authentic connection with others who valued courage and mutual respect. I built new relationships with coworkers, slowly, carefully, resisting the urge to rush what could only be earned over time. Some bonds remained work deep, but a few blossomed into true friendships. Dinner parties, laughter over wine, the unspoken solidarity of survivors of life's little wars. My story became a touchstone for my own leadership. In staff trainings, I never named names, but I spoke openly about the invisible risks of unchecked competition and the quiet corrosion of dishonesty. I made it clear that asking for help, speaking up, and admitting mistakes weren't weaknesses, but marks of a healthy team. Many thanked me for my candor. A few confessed, years later, that my example had given them strength to speak up about problems of their own. Eventually, I started mentoring new hires, especially young women, facing the labyrinth of corporate politics for the first time. Success is always a team sport, I'd tell them. Protect your ideas, but share credit. Speak your truth, but listen for the truth in others' words too. And if anyone makes you feel small to make themselves bigger, remember, that's about them, not you. A few of those mentees now lead their own teams, and their notes and texts, sometimes pegged to the anniversary of my difficult promotion, remind me that ripples of growth can outlast any trauma. Forgiveness, when it came, was quieter and more subtle than I expected. I stopped rehashing the betrayal in my head, let go of imaginary confrontations, and ceased following Sarah's social media out of morbid curiosity. Sometimes I hoped she was well, that she'd learned the lesson, that she'd someday build her victories on her own merits. But I no longer felt responsible for her path, only for mine. And what of the charm bracelet and the literal scars of lost trust? They persisted, like rings in the trunk of a tree, marking drought and storm. Even now, when the city is lively and my heart is full, I sometimes brush my finger across the grooves it left on my skin. But I don't hate those scars. They're proof I survived, adapted, and refused to let someone else write the ending of my story. What, finally, was the costly lesson? Not just that betrayal hurts, or that even the dearest friendships may not survive the journey from childhood to adulthood. It was this: boundaries and bravery nurture integrity. Lessons earned from pain should fuel growth, not bitterness. And the happiness found on the other side of adversity shines with a steadier, truer light. I still believe in friendship. I still risk trust. But I guard my name, my ideas, and my heart with fierce clarity. If I'm ever tested again, I know I'll stand up, not for vengeance, but for the dignity no one can steal unless I let them. And if ever my story helps someone else find their courage, the price I paid will feel, finally, like an extraordinary gift, one only a costly lesson could give. That's what I carry from the ashes of a golden hour. Through every new morning, I choose to lead and live with integrity.